You are watching History in Ashes, the place where we bring the past back to life, even if it sometimes feels like we are brushing soot off the forgotten corners of time. Tonight, we are attempting something extraordinary: the entire history of humans. A bold claim, I know, but every journey has to begin somewhere, and yours begins right here. Before we even get into the thick of it, let me give you a couple of unsettling truths. Did you know that more than 90% of human history passed before anyone ever carved a symbol into clay or pressed ink onto parchment? For longer than you can easily imagine, entire lifetimes went by without a single written record. And here's another one. For most of our species' existence, humans lived in small, scattered bands, rarely numbering more than 30 or 40 people. Entire lives were lived without anyone ever seeing a city, a kingdom, or even a crowd larger than what could fit around a campfire. Those are the real proportions of our history. But before we get too far, can I ask you a small favor? Could you head to the comments section and let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now? It's always fascinating to think about how you, sitting in your own corner of the world at a particular hour of the day, are linking back to the very long chain of humans who also sat listening to stories. And while you're there, please do hit the subscribe button. Think of it this way. If our ancestors hadn't learned to stick together, to gather and share knowledge, humanity might not have made it past the first winter. Subscribing is just your way of joining the tribe, and unlike the old days, you don't even have to hunt for your dinner first. So, where do we begin? The story of humans does not start with cities, palaces, or pyramids. It begins in a much quieter, lonelier place. Somewhere in Africa, around 300,000 years ago, what we now call Homo sapiens emerged. To understand what that really means, you have to set aside the world you know. No houses, no books, no maps, no sense of a globe or countries. Just raw landscapes, open grasslands where lions and hyenas stalked, thick forests buzzing with insects, rivers teeming with crocodiles. To survive here was to live on the edge of uncertainty every single day. Your ancestors, and I mean your direct ancestors, because all humans today trace their lineage back here, had only the tools they carried, often nothing more than sharpened stones. Imagine trying to cut meat from a carcass, or scrape a hide into clothing with something that chipped easily and dulled quickly. There was no certainty of food, no guarantee of safety. A night could bring rain that ruined your fire, or a predator sniffing at the edge of your camp, and yet, somehow, they endured. What is easy to forget is how small their lives really were. A band of 30 people would move with the seasons, never straying too far from fresh water or familiar paths. Every face in the group was known to you. Every absence was felt deeply. Children were rare and precious, and many did not survive. Elderly members were treasured for their memory, their knowledge of which plants cured illness or which valleys held danger. In these communities, survival was a collective act. One person's mistake, drinking the wrong water, choosing the wrong shelter, could endanger the whole group. But there is something remarkable about these early humans. They began to do things no other creatures had done before. They shaped stones not just for use, but with intent. They carried fire from one camp to another. They looked at the sky and noticed patterns. They buried their dead, suggesting they carried questions in their minds about what happens after life ends. This, too, is part of our history, not just survival, but reflection. Even in what might look like dull details, sharpening a tool for the 100th time, repeating the same hunting path lies the groundwork of everything that would follow. Over thousands of years, these small bands spread further. They followed rivers, coastlines, and herds of animals, sometimes pushing into new territories that no one from their group had ever seen before. And always, they adapted. They learned to wrap themselves in animal hides against the cold. They discovered which plants could be eaten raw, which needed to be cooked, and which were deadly. Imagine the trial and error, the quiet courage of being the one to taste an unfamiliar berry, not knowing if it would nourish you or kill you. That, too, is a forgotten form of bravery. The world was not empty when Homo sapiens moved through it. They encountered other humans not identical to us, but close enough to share fire and sometimes even families. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in parts of Asia, other hominins whose traces have nearly vanished. For a long time, there were many kinds of humans living side by side. You might wonder, what did they think of each other? Did they trade stories or only avoid conflict? Did they look at one another and feel kinship, or something more like fear? The bones suggest both cooperation and violence, and perhaps the truth is that it was always a mixture of the two. And so, the first chapter of our shared story is not one of kings or conquests, but of survival in its simplest form. People waking each morning uncertain if they would eat that day. People gathering around fires, watching sparks rise into the night sky, telling stories to children who might not live to adulthood. It sounds grim, but it was also life in its purest form. Every step taken, every tool chipped from stone, was a small act of defiance against extinction. The shocking part, and the part that makes all the rest of human history possible, is just how ordinary it all was. There were no sudden leaps, no grand inventions that changed everything overnight. The progress that brought us from these scattered bands to the complexity of the modern world was so slow that no individual would have noticed it happening. A slightly sharper stone, a slightly warmer shelter, a slightly longer memory of which paths led to food. And slowly, across tens of thousands of years, those small increments carried us here. If you had been there, if you had lived in one of those early bands, what would you have thought about? Would you have dreamed of something beyond the horizon? Or would survival have consumed your every waking moment? You wake up before dawn. The ground beneath you is hard, the air sharp with cold. The fire that kept the night predators away has burned down to faint embers. You reach for a stick, stir the coals, and coax a thin flame back to life. This simple act, firekeeping, may seem small, but in the Paleolithic world it was as vital as hunting or gathering. Fire meant warmth, safety, light, and cooked food. Without it, survival was cut in half. Imagine the quiet responsibility of the one chosen to carry an ember wrapped in bark, when the group moved on the weight of keeping the flame alive for everyone. Food, of course, was the daily struggle. Hunting was dangerous, uncertain, and costly in energy. For every successful hunt, there were many that failed. Spears, tipped with sharpened stone, were only effective at close range, and getting close to a mammoth, a wild bison, or even a deer was no easy task. Injuries were common, and a broken leg could mean death for both the hunter and the group that depended on him. That is why hunting was rarely the whole story. Gathering plants, roots, fruits, and nuts filled most of the diet, though these too came with risks. Which roots were poisonous, which berries only looked edible. Over time, trial and error built a catalogue of knowledge, passed down through whispered lessons around the fire. What's easy to overlook is the dull, grinding work that filled most hours. Stones had to be chipped into sharper blades, hides scraped endlessly to soften them into clothing, wood shaped into digging sticks. None of these tasks were glorious, but they were what made life possible. A sharper blade meant less wasted meat. A softer hide meant protection from winter. A sturdy digging stick could unearth tubers that kept hunger away. Imagine a day where hours passed with nothing but the sound of stone striking stone, or the steady rhythm of scraping a hide. These were the sounds of survival. Shelter, too, was a constant concern. Most groups were nomadic, carrying little more than what they could hold. Sometimes they huddled in caves, grateful for walls that kept out wind and rain. Other times they built temporary structures of branches, hides, and grass. There was no permanence. A shelter was only as strong as the weather allowed, and storms could destroy a night's work in moments. Yet even in these makeshift homes, there was a sense of belonging. Children played in the dirt at the entrance, elders told stories in the dim glow of firelight, and hunters returned carrying the day's catch, greeted not with ceremony, but with relief. Language, or at least the beginnings of it, was slowly taking shape. You can imagine how much difference it made to be able to warn someone of danger or to teach a child which berry not to eat. Early humans likely spoke in simple words, gestures, and sounds, but over generations, those sounds became richer. With language came the possibility of memory that extended beyond one life. Lessons no longer had to be relearned every generation. Knowledge accumulated. You could say that language itself was the first great technology. And alongside language came art. In caves across Europe and Africa, paintings of animals, handprints, and abstract shapes have survived tens of thousands of years. To kneel in front of one of these walls is to touch the thoughts of someone who lived in a world without maps or books. Someone who chose to make a mark that would outlive them. Why did they do it? Some believe it was ritual, linked to hunting magic or spiritual belief. Others see it as a form of teaching, passing on information about animals and the world. But maybe, just maybe, it was also about beauty, the simple human urge to create, even when survival was all-consuming. Burial practices add another quiet dimension to this story. Graves dating back tens of thousands of years suggest that early humans cared for their dead in ways other animals did not. Sometimes tools or ornaments were buried with the body, as though death was not the end, but a journey to somewhere else. Imagine the tenderness of wrapping a body, the sorrow of saying goodbye to someone in a world where life was already so fragile. Even in their most basic forms, these burials reveal something extraordinary. Humans were not only surviving but wondering. They were asking questions about existence itself. Daily life was not without rhythm. Women, men, and children all had roles, though they shifted with need. Children gathered small sticks for fire or berries close to camp. Adults hunted, foraged, made tools. Elders taught and remembered. Time was measured not by hours but by light and dark, by the turning of the seasons, by the migrations of animals. If the berries ripened, you moved. If the rains came, you sought shelter. If the herds shifted, you followed. Life was both predictable and precarious, predictable in its cycles, precarious in its uncertainties. What about conflict? Evidence suggests that early humans did not live in a constant state of war, though violence certainly occurred. A spear point lodged in a rib, a fractured skull. These tell us that disputes happened, perhaps over food or territory. But large-scale organized warfare, the kind we associate with later civilizations, was still far away. More common than fighting was avoidance. Groups were small, and the easiest solution to conflict was often to move away. After all, there was always another valley, another stretch of coast, another riverbank to explore. And yet, slowly, the world began to fill. Humans spread out of Africa into the Middle East, into Asia, into Europe. Each new landscape demanded adaptation. In colder climates, fire and clothing became even more vital. In hotter ones, water management and shade mattered most. The details of life, how to carry water, how to store food, how to track animals changed with each new environment. It was not the grand events that mattered here, but the small, dull choices. Where to camp, when to move, what to eat. Each choice, repeated thousands of times, shaped the fate of generations. When you step back and look at this period, what stands out is not drama but persistence. For tens of thousands of years, nothing exciting happened in the way we might expect. No empires rose or fell, no cities were built, no great inventions transformed the world overnight. And yet, without these long ages of quiet survival, nothing else would have been possible. Every piece of technology, every city, every culture rests on the foundation of these unnoticed lives. So here's the question. When we think of human history, why do we so often skip past this vast stretch of time? Why do we focus on the last few thousand years, when the real heart of our story lies in the forgotten days of stone and fire? The journey out of Africa was not a single dramatic march, but a slow trickle, stretched across thousands of years. Picture small groups, no more than a few dozen people, following coastlines, rivers, and the trails of animals. There was no sense of leaving a homeland, because no such concept existed. They were simply moving, step by step, seeking food, water, and safer ground. But in doing so, they began to spread across the world. The earliest paths led into the Middle East. The climate shifted constantly, opening green corridors one century and closing them the next. To survive, humans had to be flexible. A valley rich with plants and game could dry up within a generation, forcing another migration. Imagine the resilience it took to pack up, again and again, carrying children, tools, and the fragile ember of fire to a new unknown place. As they moved further, they encountered others. In Europe and Western Asia, they met the Neanderthals, humans like us but different in shape and build. Stockier, shorter, with stronger limbs, they were adapted to cold climates and had lived there for hundreds of thousands of years. For a long time, scholars painted them as brutish or slow, but the evidence tells a different story. Neanderthals made tools, wore clothing, buried their dead, and may even have had music and art. They were not us, but they were not entirely other either. The encounters between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals were complex. Sometimes, bones show evidence of violence, fractured skulls, spear wounds, reminders that competition for resources could turn deadly. But other traces tell of something else. DNA evidence reveals that humans and Neanderthals interbred. Today, if you are not of purely African descent, you carry small fragments of Neanderthal DNA in your body. It shapes parts of your immune system, your skin, even your hair. That means the story of human history is not only one of replacement but also of mixing. Further east, another branch of humans waited the Denisovans. We know them mostly from a cave in Siberia, where fragments of bone and teeth were discovered. Their genetic legacy survives in modern populations, particularly among people in Southeast Asia and Oceania. The Denisovans, like the Neanderthals, became part of us. Imagine, for a moment, the meeting of two groups in a cold valley, strangers to each other, speaking different sounds, carrying different knowledge of the land. What did they see when they looked into one another's eyes? Did they sense kinship, or threat, or both at once? As humans spread into Asia, they adapted to climates they had never known before. In the north, the cold demanded new strategies. Clothing stitched from hides, shelters dug into earth, fires kept burning longer. In the tropics, survival meant coping with heat, insects, and the constant need for fresh water. Each environment reshaped the details of daily life. A stone tool that worked well in the savannah might not be useful in the rainforest. A hunting strategy that worked for antelope had to be abandoned for wild pigs or monkeys. Slowly, humans became the most adaptable species the world had ever seen. And still, the migrations continued. Across land bridges exposed by low seas, humans reached places that must have seemed like the edge of the world. Into Australia, tens of thousands of years ago, across icy Siberia, and eventually, much later, into the Americas. Each step was an act of endurance, not conquest. No one thought of discovering a continent. They thought of finding food, water, shelter, and then perhaps finding themselves too far to ever go back. What gets lost in the grand sweep of maps is the scale of time. These movements did not happen in decades, but in millennia. Generations lived and died without knowing they were part of a larger story. A child was born, learned to walk, gathered roots, hunted small animals, had children of their own, and died, never realizing they were one link in a chain that would stretch across the entire globe. Yet, these unnoticed steps added up. By 50,000 years ago, humans had already spread far beyond their birthplace. By 30,000 years ago, Neanderthals were gone, their last refuges in Europe empty. By 20,000 years ago, people had crossed into the frozen expanses of Siberia, setting the stage for the peopling of the Americas. The pattern repeated everywhere, small groups pushing into new lands, adapting, mixing, sometimes replacing, always surviving. And in the midst of all this, the details of life remained stubbornly ordinary. Families gathered around fires, Hunters tracked animals, mothers soothed children, elders told stories of places long forgotten. If you could step into one of those nights and listen, you might find the sounds familiar: laughter, argument, the crackle of fire, the hush as people drifted into sleep. Human life was already deeply human, even before there were cities, nations, or history books to record it. So, we arrive at a strange truth. The spread of humanity across the globe was not a heroic epic, but a quiet, patient persistence. The encounters with Neanderthals and Denisovans were not the battles of legend, but the slow interweaving of lives, sometimes with conflict, sometimes with love. And the reason you are here now, listening, is because those countless ordinary choices, where to walk, what to eat, whom to trust, led to survival. And yet, one question lingers. Why did we survive when others did not? Was it luck? Was it adaptability? Or was it something else entirely? You can hold a stone in your hand and see the outline of human history in it. Not just any stone, but one chipped and sharpened by someone who lived tens of thousands of years ago. The earliest tools were little more than flakes knocked from larger rocks, sharp enough to cut meat or scrape hides. But over time, those flakes became more deliberate, more refined: hand axes with symmetrical edges, blades long enough to slice cleanly, points sharp enough to pierce. Each improvement might have seemed small at the time, but taken together, they were nothing less than the foundation of human progress. What's striking is how long it took. For hundreds of thousands of years, tool-making changed very little. A child born into one generation might have grown old and died without ever seeing a tool different from the ones their grandparents used. Innovation was not a constant rush forward, but a trickle. Yet when it came, it stuck. The ability to create fire, the knowledge of which stones flaked best, the skill of shaping wood into spears once learned, these things became part of what it meant to be human. Language is harder to trace, because words vanish with the speaker. But evidence lies in what people accomplished together. Coordinated hunts, shared rituals, and the teaching of children all suggest communication more complex than mere gestures or grunts. Perhaps it began with simple warnings: danger, food, come here. Over time, words may have strung together into stories, and stories were powerful. They allowed memory to stretch across generations. A grandfather could describe a distant valley he once visited, and his grandchildren could find it even decades later. In this way, language turned knowledge into something that outlived individuals. Imagine the quiet wonder of a campfire where stories were first told. A child listening wide-eyed to tales of animals, of ancestors, of the stars above. Perhaps those stories explained the world in ways that were not factual but meaningful. Why the sun rose, why death came, why certain animals were sacred. With language, humans not only survived but made sense of survival. They gave their lives context. Art, too, arrived slowly but unmistakably. Deep in caves, people painted animals: bison with arched backs, horses mid-stride, deer with delicate antlers. Sometimes they left handprints, pressed against stone with pigment, like signatures from the distant past. These were not decorations for others to admire. Most of these caves were dark, hidden, and difficult to reach. That suggests something deeper: ritual, memory, or perhaps an attempt to communicate with forces beyond the visible world. Other forms of art were portable: beads made from shells, ornaments carved from bone, figures shaped from clay or ivory. To wear an ornament was to say something about yourself, not survival, but identity. Who you were, what you believed, what group you belonged to. This was the beginning of culture, shared meaning beyond the immediate needs of food and shelter. And alongside art came music. Flutes carved from bird bones, drums beaten from stretched hides, rhythms tapped on stone. Music, like story, gave shape to gatherings. It marked rituals, hunts, and moments of grief or joy. Think of how it must have sounded in the flicker of firelight, a low rhythm echoing in a cave, voices raised in unison. Music, too, was survival, though in a different way. It bound people together, creating bonds stronger than any single tool could provide. What often gets overlooked is the patience behind all of this. It took generations of careful hands to learn which stones flaked best, which pigments clung longest, which words carried meaning. Nothing came quickly. And yet, those quiet, unnoticed discoveries changed everything. A sharper blade meant more efficient hunting. A story passed down meant safer travel. A painted wall meant memory made visible. It is tempting to think of these developments as a straight line of progress, but they were more like scattered sparks. A community here made beads, while another far away did not. One valley's people painted caves, while another valley's left no mark at all. Culture was uneven, fragile, sometimes lost when groups moved on or died out. But the sparks were enough. Over time, they spread, caught, and grew brighter. And in these small acts, chipping a stone, shaping a bead, telling a story, humans were doing something new in the natural world. They were not just reacting to their environment, they were reshaping it in ways no other creature had done. They carried not only tools, but ideas. The line between survival and meaning blurred. What began as necessity became tradition. So when you look at the cave paintings of Chauvet, or the Venus figurines carved from ivory, or the flutes found in German caves, you are not just looking at art. You are looking at the moment humans began to see themselves as more than survival machines. You are looking at the origins of imagination. And yet, the question remains, why did humans feel the need to create at all? Why spend precious time painting, carving, or playing music when survival was already so hard? What was it in us that demanded beauty alongside necessity? For tens of thousands of years, humans survived by moving. They followed herds, ripening plants, and shifting seasons. Life was uncertain, but it was flexible. And then, slowly, in different corners of the world, people began to experiment with something different. Instead of chasing food, they started to grow it. The first attempts were probably accidents. Seeds dropped near campfires sprouted weeks later. People noticed that gathering from these spots was easier than searching far and wide. Over time, they began to plant deliberately. Wheat and barley in the Fertile Crescent, rice in China, maize in the Americas, sorghum and yams in Africa. These were not sudden inventions, but cautious experiments, tested and passed down across generations. Farming demanded something new: patience. Hunting could bring meat in a single afternoon, but crops took months to grow. That meant planning, waiting, and protecting the land. It also meant staying put. Slowly, humans who had wandered for millennia began to settle. Camps became seasonal, then permanent. Villages appeared, at first little more than clusters of huts, but revolutionary all the same. Settling down changed everything. Food storage became possible: baskets of grain, pits of dried roots. With storage came surpluses, and with surpluses came choices. A family could survive a lean season, or feed more children, or trade with neighbors. The balance between life and death shifted slightly in humanity's favor, but agriculture was not easier. It was, in many ways, harder. Fields had to be cleared, seeds planted, weeds pulled, pests driven away. Drought could kill a crop. Floods could ruin months of labor. Backs ached from bending. Hands blistered from digging. Diseases spread more easily in crowded settlements than in scattered camps. By some measures, the first farmers lived shorter, harsher lives than their hunting ancestors. Yet the stability of food and the growth of communities outweighed the costs. The details of these early villages are fascinating in their ordinariness. Houses of mud brick or wattle and daub, clustered together. Hearths where meals were cooked, shared by families who now lived side by side year after year. Dogs domesticated to help with hunting or guard against intruders. Children playing in the dirt streets, elders sitting in doorways watching. It was not yet civilization, but it was no longer the wandering life of old. Farming also altered the rhythm of time. Days were no longer dictated by the chase, but by the cycle of planting and harvest. Seasons mattered more than ever. People began to track them carefully, noticing the movements of stars, the phases of the moon, the length of shadows. Calendars were born, not from curiosity but from necessity. To plant too early or too late could mean starvation. With villages came community, and with community came complexity. People needed to cooperate to irrigate fields, store grain, and protect herds. But they also began to divide tasks. Some farmed, others made tools, others specialized in weaving, pottery, or building. Work became more varied, and skills more refined. In the slow churn of ordinary life, the roots of economy took hold. Religion, too, took on new forms. The unpredictability of crops made people turn to rituals, hoping to secure good harvests. Figurines of fertility goddesses, shrines to ancestors, offerings of food and drink, these reveal the anxiety and hope of farming societies. When rain was late or locusts devoured fields, belief offered an explanation and a plea for help. What is striking is how local these developments were. Farming began independently in several regions, each with its own crops, tools, and traditions. There was no single agricultural revolution, but many, scattered across the globe, and each one was fragile, vulnerable to failure, yet persistent enough to endure. The effects of farming rippled outward. Populations grew because food was more reliable. Larger populations meant more villages, and more villages meant greater contact and sometimes conflict with neighbors. Walls were built, not just to keep out animals, but to guard against other people. For the first time, humans began to think of land as something owned and defended. Territory became more than space to roam. It became inheritance. Yet even here, in this great turning point, daily life was full of dull necessities. Grinding grain between stones, hauling water from rivers, patching roofs, tending fires. These tasks filled most hours, unnoticed yet essential. Civilization would eventually be built on writing, cities, and kingdoms, but beneath all of it lay the endless repetition of ordinary labor. The rise of farming was not a dramatic leap forward, but a shift in balance, one seed at a time. And still, a question lingers. Why did humans give up the freedom of roaming for the burdens of farming? Was it desperation, opportunity, or something in our nature that longed to root ourselves in one place? From villages came towns, and from towns, the first cities. It happened slowly, almost invisibly, over centuries. A village would grow, adding new houses, more families, and eventually walls. Markets formed where people gathered to trade baskets of grain, clay pots, or woven cloth. Soon, instead of just surviving, people began organizing. And organization meant rules, roles, and something altogether new: government. The first cities rose near rivers. Water meant life, and rivers provided fertile soil, transport, and trade routes. The Tigris and Euphrates in Mesopotamia, the Nile in Egypt, the Indus in South Asia, the Yellow River in China. Each cradle of civilization was shaped by its river, nourished and threatened by its floods. Life in these early cities was crowded, noisy, and endlessly practical. Narrow streets wound between mud brick houses. Children played in courtyards. Traders hawked goods in bustling markets. Farmers arrived from the countryside with donkeys loaded down with grain. Priests performed rituals in towering temples, their voices echoing against walls that seemed impossibly large compared to the small huts of the past. What made these cities different was not just their size, but their complexity. Someone needed to decide how irrigation canals were dug, who got water first, and how grain was stored. Someone needed to record who owned which field, or how many sheep were in a herd. And out of this need came one of humanity's most powerful tools: writing. At first, writing was simple. Marks pressed into clay tablets in Mesopotamia or carved into bones in China. They were not stories but records, tallies of sheep, debts owed, grain rations distributed. It was bureaucracy in its infancy, dull to read, but revolutionary in purpose. For the first time, memory could live outside the human mind. Over time, writing expanded. Scribes began recording not just accounts but myths, prayers, and laws. Kings ordered their victories inscribed on stone to be remembered forever. Stories that had once been told by firelight were now etched into permanence. Writing allowed the past to be preserved and ideas to travel further than any voice could carry. Cities also changed belief. Temples rose in the center, enormous compared to houses. Priests grew in power, claiming authority not just over rituals but over knowledge itself. Gods were imagined as rulers of the cosmos, distant and mighty, requiring offerings and obedience. Religion became organized, structured, and entwined with politics. With cities came hierarchy. Not everyone farmed anymore. Some became full-time craftsmen, traders, or soldiers. Wealth gathered in certain households, while others struggled on the margins. Inequality, which had been faint in hunting bands and early villages, became unmistakable. A handful of families ruled, many others served. Power was no longer only physical, it was economic, political, and spiritual. The architecture of these cities reflected their ambitions. Ziggurats in Mesopotamia, rising like mountains built by hand, pyramids in Egypt, massive tombs for kings who claimed divine power, palaces with decorated walls, streets lined with workshops, storehouses filled with grain. These structures required thousands of workers and vast coordination, proof that cities had become more than clusters of homes. They were machines of human effort, grinding day and night. And yet, amid the grandeur, daily life was still ordinary. A potter shaping clay on a wheel, a farmer leading oxen through muddy fields, children learning letters on wax tablets, women grinding flour on heavy stones. For every king or priest, thousands of lives were lived in anonymity, carrying water, baking bread, weaving cloth. Civilization grew not just from rulers and monuments, but from the persistence of these unnoticed hands. Conflict, too, grew sharper. Cities needed resources, and their neighbors often had them. Armies marched, walls rose higher, weapons became more deadly. Bronze was cast into swords and spears, turning disputes into wars. For the first time, mass violence became a feature of human life, and victory meant not just survival, but expansion, tribute, and empire. The invention of writing, though, remained the quietest revolution of all. Think of it. After hundreds of thousands of years of spoken memory, humans had found a way to trap words in clay and stone. Instructions could be sent across distance. Laws could bind strangers together. Stories could outlast their tellers. Writing shrank time and space, creating a thread of continuity where once there had only been fragile memory. Civilization did not arrive everywhere at once, nor did it replace all older ways of life. While cities flourished in river valleys, many people continued hunting, gathering, or herding. These worlds existed side by side, sometimes trading, sometimes clashing. Humanity had split into multiple paths, each adapting to its own environment. Looking back, it is tempting to see the rise of cities as inevitable, but it was fragile. Floods could wipe them out, droughts could starve them, wars could burn them to ash. And yet, despite all this, they endured. The seeds planted in these first cities, writing, government, religion, hierarchy, would shape every society to come. Civilization was not born in a single moment, nor was it a smooth ascent. It was a patchwork of experiments, failures, and fragile successes, stitched together over centuries. And always, beneath the monuments and records, lay the simple fact of human persistence. People rising each day to grind grain, haul water, and keep life going. At first, cities were islands, little hubs of power, surrounded by farmland, villages, and wilderness. But no city could truly survive alone. Wheat might grow well near one river, but copper and tin for bronze came from far away. One valley might have fertile soil, another thick forests, another rich seams of stone. From this simple need came one of humanity's oldest bonds, trade. Imagine a dusty road stretching out from a city gate. Along it walk merchants, their donkeys heavy with goods, clay jars of oil, bags of barley, ingots of copper, rolls of cloth. Each step links one world to another, until soon the city is no longer just itself, but part of a chain, a network of exchange that stretches far beyond its walls. Trade brought not only goods but ideas. A potter in Mesopotamia might learn a new design from Egypt. A farmer in the Indus Valley might experiment with crops first grown in Mesopotamian soil. A scribe in China might adapt symbols that had drifted along rivers and mountain passes. Trade carried memory as surely as it carried spices or metals. But trade also brought envy, rivalry, and the urge for control. If a neighbor had fertile fields, why barter when you could conquer? If a caravan passed through your land, why not tax it or seize it altogether? Out of this tension came the earliest empires. An empire was a bold idea. One city, one people, one ruler extending power far beyond their home. The Akkadians in Mesopotamia were among the first, their king Sargon claiming to rule the four corners of the world. Later came the Egyptians, stretching their reach along the Nile. The Hittites in Anatolia, the Assyrians with their brutal armies, the Persians with their sprawling roads. Each empire in turn rose, ruled, and fell, leaving behind fragments of power and culture. Empires were fragile but magnetic. They drew in conquered peoples, blending traditions, languages, and religions. In their courts, scribes recorded not only taxes but epic tales. In their markets, goods from across vast distances mingled. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar from Lebanon, gold from Nubia, silk from China. The world, once scattered, began to weave itself together. Religion, too, travelled. A god worshipped in one city might be adopted in another, altered slightly but recognizable. The Mesopotamian goddess Ishtar found echoes in the Greek Aphrodite. Egyptian gods influenced Canaanite beliefs. In this slow drift, myths became shared stories, reshaped by distance and time. Empires also standardized life. Roads, weights, measures, and coins appeared, making trade smoother and authority clearer. If you lived under the Persian Empire, you might walk along the royal road stretching over 1,000 miles and find the same coin, stamped with the same image, used in distant markets. It gave a sense of order to a chaotic world, though always enforced by the threat of soldiers' spears. And yet, empires were never permanent. They expanded until they could expand no more, then fractured under the weight of their size. Rebellions flared, borders crumbled, new powers emerged. For the average person, life meant adapting one year paying tribute to one king, the next year swearing loyalty to another. Survival meant flexibility, not loyalty. The Bronze Age saw both dazzling growth and sudden collapse. Around 1200 BCE, great powers across the eastern Mediterranean, Egypt, the Hittites, Mycenaean Greece faced disaster. Cities were burned, trade routes shattered, populations scattered. The causes remain debated: invasions by mysterious sea peoples, drought, earthquakes, or perhaps a mix of all. For centuries, darkness fell over places once filled with palaces and markets. But humanity is stubborn. Out of collapse came renewal. Iron replaced bronze, offering stronger weapons and tools. New peoples emerged: the Phoenicians, with their seafaring trade and invention of the alphabet; the Israelites, shaping a religion that would echo across millennia; the Greeks, experimenting with city-states and democracy. History, it seemed, was not a straight line upward, but a rhythm of rise and fall. Trade revived too, stronger than before. The Phoenicians sailed across the Mediterranean, founding colonies like Carthage. Caravans moved along the Silk Road, though it would not be named that for centuries. Spices from India, silk from China, amber from Northern Europe, all began to flow through hands eager for wealth and novelty. As goods traveled, so did disease. Epidemics swept through cities, carried by the same networks that spread ideas and luxuries. A thriving city could be emptied in weeks by a plague, its streets silent except for the echo of footsteps and the cries of the dying. Trade was both a gift and a curse, knitting humanity closer even as it spread catastrophe. Empires grew larger. The Persians built one of the most astonishing, stretching from the Indus River to the Mediterranean. They ruled not only by force but by tolerance, allowing conquered peoples to keep their languages and gods as long as they paid tribute. This blend of strength and pragmatism let the empire endure for centuries, setting a model for those who followed. Then came Alexander the Great, whose conquests stitched Greece, Egypt, Persia, and parts of India into a single, though short-lived empire. Wherever he went, he left behind cities named Alexandria that became crossroads of culture. Greek language, art, and ideas spread, mixing with older traditions. It was the beginning of what historians call the Hellenistic Age, where the world became more connected than ever before. And still, life for most remained ordinary. Farmers ploughed, potters shaped clay, children learned to read or worked in fields. The great dramas of empires mattered, but survival depended on daily labor. A farmer in the Nile Delta or a shepherd in Anatolia might never see a king, yet their work fed the palace, fueled the army, and sustained the empire's illusion of permanence. From the mingling of peoples came not only conflict but creativity. Mathematics from Babylon influenced Greek thinkers. Egyptian medicine found echoes in later traditions. Indian philosophies traveled west, shaping dialogues in distant lands. Every contact left traces, weaving cultures together in ways no conqueror could fully control. The roads, markets, and ports of these early networks were the ancestors of globalization. They showed that humans are restless creatures, always moving, seeking, and exchanging. To trade was not just to survive, but to imagine, to see in foreign goods and foreign faces the possibility of something beyond the horizon. And so, by the time Rome began to rise, the world was already connected in fragile threads. Empires had come and gone, trade routes had shifted like rivers, religions had spread and adapted. Civilization was no longer a series of isolated experiments, but a tangled web, vibrating with the motion of countless lives. Empires, trade, religion, war, these were not separate stories, but strands of one vast fabric. Each tug pulled on another, until the fate of a farmer in Mesopotamia might be tied to a merchant in Egypt, or a sailor in Greece, or a soldier in Persia. Humanity, once scattered, had become entangled. You walk further into this long timeline, and now the world of humanity looks both familiar and alien. The age of quiet survival is still here, but something remarkable is stirring. By this point, humans have spread across much of the earth, carrying with them not only fire and tools, but also memory, story, and skill. The land is marked not by cities or stone monuments yet, but by countless camps, seasonal shelters, and scattered hunting grounds. Life is still small in scale, but it is already global in scope. Think of it. For tens of thousands of years, your kind lived in groups that rarely numbered more than a few dozen. Yet somehow, these groups walked across continents. They crossed deserts, scaled mountains, and made rafts strong enough to slip over waves into unknown seas. Every step forward was a survival gamble, and yet, they made it. You might picture this world as raw wilderness, untouched by modern hands. Forests stretched unbroken, rivers roared without dams, and animal herds moved in uncountable numbers. To live here required not only strength but an encyclopedic knowledge of plants, seasons, and animal patterns. Food was not stored in pantries or markets, it was moving, growing, or waiting to be dug out of the earth. This meant that human memory itself became a survival tool. The elders of a group carried in their minds the knowledge of migration routes, dangerous plants, safe water sources, and the timing of animal herds. Without their memory, the group might vanish in a single hungry season. Imagine how fragile that is. The difference between life and death could rest on whether one person remembered the right valley where berries ripened after rainfall. Even in this apparent wilderness, humans were reshaping their world. Fire, once feared, was now a companion. Entire landscapes were managed by flame, grasslands renewed, and animals drawn to the fresh growth that followed. Archaeologists today can still trace the marks of those ancient fires across regions. To you, fire might be warmth or a candle flickering at night, but to them, it was survival, strategy, and control over nature itself. When groups burned clearings, they were not only shaping ecosystems but also unknowingly laying the groundwork for future farming. Language, too, was evolving from simple signals into something far richer. You cannot see these words now, for no record remains, but you can imagine them spoken in flickering firelight. Warnings, encouragements, and perhaps, slowly, stories. A story is more than entertainment. It carries memory forward, binds people together, and gives meaning to existence. The first stories likely explained the world around them, why the sun rises, why the animals migrate, why death comes. By telling these tales, humans built a shared mental map of reality. Without it, survival would have been lonely and fragmented. With it, groups gained identity and purpose. Across continents, humans encountered others who were not quite like themselves. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, and other shadowy relatives whose names we are still uncovering. These were not monsters or enemies in every case, they were cousins, sharing the world and sometimes even sharing life. Evidence suggests that humans and Neanderthals not only fought but also cooperated, learned, and interbred. If you trace your ancestry far enough, you likely carry fragments of these encounters in your very body. Think about that. The bloodlines of vanished species live on in you, a quiet reminder that history is never as clean and separate as it seems. The tools of this time may look primitive to your eyes: chipped stone edges, bone needles, wooden spears, but to those who carried them, they were lifelines. A sharp flake of stone meant the difference between tearing flesh with bare hands or carving it cleanly. A needle of bone meant clothing stitched tight against cold that could otherwise kill. Even small changes in toolmaking carried great weight. Consider the bow and arrow, invented somewhere in this span of ages. With it, distance became power. A hunter no longer needed to charge a beast at close range with a spear. They could strike from afar. This shifted not only the safety of the hunt, but also the balance of human groups. For now, smaller individuals, even children, could contribute in powerful ways. But daily life was not all hunts and tools. Much of it was repetition, gathering roots, scraping hides, mending shelters. These are the quiet labors that rarely make it into history books, yet shaped existence more than any single battle. A woman digging for tubers, a man repairing a spear, children learning how to weave grasses into ropes. These actions may sound dull, but they were the pulse of survival. Each small act was a thread, and together they wove the fabric of human endurance. Then there is art, perhaps the most surprising survival strategy of all. In caves deep under the earth, humans painted animals with careful strokes, outlined hands against walls, and carved figures from bone and ivory. At first glance, this seems unnecessary for survival, but it is not. Art binds memory, conveys knowledge, and inspires cohesion. A painting of a bison might carry hunting lessons. A handprint might declare belonging. A carved figure might symbolize hope or fertility. Through art, humans built bridges across generations, carrying meaning from one to the next. In those dark caves, with only the light of fire to reveal shapes, your ancestors dreamed beyond the present moment. The world was harsh, but humans adapted with astonishing flexibility. Where deserts stretched, they carried water in animal skins. Where cold gripped, they stitched furs into layered clothing. Where seas beckoned, they shaped boats from reeds and wood. Each environment demanded a unique response, and humans learned, often painfully, through trial and error. Failures were frequent, and entire groups may have vanished in silence, leaving no trace. Yet others endured, carrying the lessons forward. You are the result of that endurance. The slow spread of humans across the world was not a triumphant march, but a fragile trickle. Step by step, valley by valley, they moved outward. Generations passed before a new region was fully known, and many times they must have wondered whether to continue or turn back. Yet curiosity and necessity pushed them on. Over thousands of years, footprints pressed into every continent except Antarctica. Each step was both survival and transformation. The animals they encountered shifted their diets. The landscapes they crossed shaped their tools. The climates they endured changed their bodies. To move outward was to change inward as well. Now pause and consider. Through all these ages, no one knew they were part of human history. They were only living, one day at a time, in worlds both brutal and beautiful. Their greatest triumphs were not empires or monuments, but persistence, the ability to wake up one more morning, to gather one more root, to survive one more winter. When you think of history, you may imagine battles or kings, but for most of time, it was these nameless survivors who carried humanity forward. Without them, there would be no written words, no cities, no you. And so, the story deepens. You have walked from the first sparks of humanity into a world of resilience, memory, and adaptation. But a new change waits ahead, one that will alter everything the moment when humans stopped wandering endlessly and began to stay. When they built the first villages, planted the first seeds, and traded the uncertainty of hunting for the certainty and burden of farming. Yet before we step into that transformation, ask yourself, what was lost when humans left behind the wild world that had shaped them for so long? Imagine yourself not in the crowded streets of a modern city, but standing on a grassy plain, stretching wider than the eye can follow. The wind carries the scent of dry earth and distant fires. Somewhere, hidden within the tall grasses, small groups of people are moving carefully. They are us, but not quite as you recognize yourself. They have the same bones, the same spark of thought, but their lives are not measured in years, jobs, or possessions. Instead, survival is counted by how many meals can be found before the next sunset, or how quickly the group can escape when a predator approaches. Daily life in the Paleolithic world was built around routines that might sound monotonous, but were deeply significant. A child's day might begin with gathering berries under the careful eye of a parent, their fingers stained red with fruit juice. They were already participating in the delicate balance of survival. Meanwhile, older members of the group prepared tools, simple stones chipped into sharp edges used to scrape hides, crack bones for marrow, or cut strips of meat. Nothing was wasted. The idea of convenience or abundance was foreign. The idea of efficiency was survival itself. You can almost picture it. A woman squatting beside a riverbank, using a sharpened flake of flint to pry open the shell of a freshwater mussel. Each bite of meat was precious, not because it was delicious, but because it meant strength for another day. When hunger pressed harder, some would crush acorns or roots into paste, bitter but sustaining. These were not banquets, and they did not call them meals. They were the difference between life continuing or fading away. Fire was perhaps the greatest treasure. You might think of it today as a tool for warmth or cooking, but in this era, fire meant protection from the cold that could kill in a single night. It also meant light when predators prowled in the dark. Imagine crouching near the embers, the smoky air clinging to your skin. The warmth soothed muscles sore from walking miles across uneven ground, and the faint light allowed stories to be told. Words carried slowly, building bonds, carrying knowledge. A child who heard a story about which plants made the stomach sick might carry that memory for life, passing it along decades later when it saved another. In such ways, culture began to form not through monuments or writing, but through whispers around flames. Even small details of their day reveal something remarkable about us. Consider clothing. Early humans didn't have wardrobes, but they learned to scrape animal skins, drying and softening them with repeated effort. Hides became coverings against biting winds. Shoes were little more than wrapped pieces of leather, tied with sinew, but each one represented hours of work, shaped by trial and error. To you, they might look crude. To them, they were survival inventions. The world was not silent, though it often felt vast and empty. A group might travel 20 miles in search of water, their footprints washed away by the next rainfall. Along the way, they would listen. The calls of birds, the snapping of twigs beneath unseen weight, the rush of rivers that could not be crossed easily. Each sound was information, as valuable as any map you could imagine. If you were there, you would learn quickly that ignoring these details meant death. Death itself was never far away. To break a bone could mean months of weakness, often fatal if the group could not provide. Yet, archaeological evidence shows care. Broken bones healed straight, teeth lost in youth but followed by decades of survival, suggesting others chewed food for them or shared softer meals. Compassion was not a modern invention. Even in this harsh life, humans carried one another. They buried their dead with stones and flowers, leaving behind hints of grief and memory. For people who had so little, to place flowers in a grave was not necessity, it was meaning. There is an odd beauty in the monotony of their lives. You may imagine the Paleolithic as a time of constant excitement, hunting mammoths, fending off saber-toothed cats. But most days were filled with slower tasks. Walking, watching, waiting. Hours spent grinding stones into sharper edges, repeating the motion until hands ached. Days searching for signs of herds, only to return empty-handed. Nights falling asleep hungry, the taste of smoke in the mouth, the stomach hollow. These were not wasted hours. They were the hours that shaped patience, observation, and persistence traits that carried us through millennia. It is worth pausing here to consider what home meant in this world. There were no permanent dwellings. A home was where the fire burned that night, where bodies huddled together under hides to share warmth. Caves offered temporary refuge, but often humans built simple shelters from branches, grass, and mud. They were not meant to last. Movement was constant, following animals, avoiding floods, escaping the exhaustion of a depleted area. Your sense of place today, tied to walls and streets, would feel foreign in such a world. To them, the horizon itself was the only permanent structure. Despite the difficulties, there were moments of joy. We know this from carvings, from flutes made of bird bones, from beads strung together. Imagine someone in a small band, their hands roughened from labor, taking time to carve lines into a piece of antler. The act had no immediate survival benefit. It was expression, perhaps decoration, perhaps identity, perhaps something we will never understand. But it proves that even when food was scarce and life uncertain, humans sought more than survival. They sought meaning. As you listen, you may be tempted to see these people as distant, primitive, separated from you by unimaginable time. But if one of them were to appear before you, washed and dressed, you would not think them alien. You would recognize their face, the curve of their hands, the sound of their laughter. Their concerns were survival, but their capacity for thought, imagination, and tenderness was not so different from yours. So I ask you, what does it mean that the vast majority of human history was lived in this way? That for tens of thousands of years, daily life was not about progress or conquest, but about staying alive and carrying knowledge forward? Does that not reshape how you think about what it means to be human? By now, humans were no longer confined to one region. From Africa, they had stepped into unfamiliar lands, crossing deserts, rivers, and mountains. Each migration carried not just bodies, but knowledge, culture, and the fragile spark of survival. Imagine a group moving cautiously through a thick forest, the sun dimmed by high canopies, every snap of a twig sending hearts racing. Every step forward was an experiment. Which path would lead to water? Which plants were edible? Which animals dangerous? These journeys were perilous, yet they were the reason your ancestors now occupied almost every corner of the world. As humans spread, they encountered other human species. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in parts of Asia, perhaps other populations we have yet to discover. These encounters were complex. Evidence suggests some were hostile, some cautious, and some collaborative. DNA shows that we interbred with Neanderthals, leaving fragments of their genome in people alive today. Imagine a scene: a small band of humans meeting a Neanderthal group across a river. They are similar yet different, taller or shorter, stronger or stockier, with faces that look almost familiar, and yet they are cautious, watching one another. Here, survival is not only about hunting skill but judgment, social intelligence, and subtle diplomacy. Tools were shared and learned across these encounters. Neanderthals were skilled hunters with deep knowledge of their lands. Humans adopted some of their techniques: stone points, methods of fire control, ways of preparing hides. Knowledge flowed in both directions, like a quiet river under a vast forest canopy, unnoticed by the world but changing lives profoundly. And it is here, in these subtle exchanges, that humans first began to shape a collective identity beyond isolated groups. The climate itself played a role. Ice ages ebbed and flowed, glaciers stretching across continents, then retreating. Landscapes transformed, seas rose, rivers changed course, forests advanced and receded. Humans adapted by learning the rhythm of the seasons, reading the sky, observing animal migrations. To survive was to understand time on a scale larger than a single life. Knowledge of generations became crucial. Which valleys were safe in winter? Which coasts provided shellfish during certain months? Survival depended on accumulated memory, passed verbally or through ritual. Rituals themselves became more structured. Archaeologists have found evidence of early burials, carefully arranged graves, sometimes with flowers or grave goods. These acts suggest that humans were contemplating life and death in ways that transcended immediate survival. The act of caring for the dead required extra effort, yet it persisted. It hints at a growing awareness of mortality, the need to mark life beyond the body, and perhaps the beginning of shared belief systems. Art continued to flourish. Cave paintings became more sophisticated, showing perspective, motion, and animals in vivid detail. Handprints, sometimes hundreds of them layered over each other, became symbolic, perhaps a declaration of presence or identity. Portable art-carved figurines, necklaces made of shells and bones traveled with their owners, crossing rivers and mountains, leaving trails of culture across the continent. Imagine a person picking up a small carved figure, feeling the smooth edges worn by hands over generations, and carrying it into the unknown. These artifacts are whispers of human thought, preserved against time, and yet, life was never easy. Large animals provided abundant meat but also brought danger. Predators lurked, storms destroyed shelters, and sudden scarcity tested every skill. Survival was not heroic in the way stories often imagine, but painstaking. Every meal required effort, every child had to be protected, every shelter maintained. The rhythm of work and rest, hunting and preparation, shaped daily existence. These routines formed the invisible scaffolding on which human culture was built. Consider the tools themselves. A hand axe might take hours to shape, its edges carefully flaked to perfection. A spear tip had to be balanced for hunting. Each innovation required learning, practice, and observation. Mistakes could be deadly. A poorly shaped spear might fail to pierce an animal, wasting precious energy and risking hunger. Yet, through repetition, humans learned, passed down knowledge, and improved designs over generations. Innovation was incremental, invisible, and essential. Humans also began experimenting with group coordination on larger scales. Hunting large animals required strategy and cooperation. People drove herds into traps, surrounded prey, and coordinated attacks using signals, gestures, calls, or perhaps simple sounds. These early strategies demanded communication and trust. They also required leadership, often situational. One individual might lead the hunt today, another tomorrow. Leadership was practical, fragile, and earned through skill rather than inheritance. Food diversity increased as humans adapted to new regions. Coastal groups learned to fish and collect shellfish. Riverine communities developed techniques to trap freshwater species, and forest-dwelling groups mastered nut and fruit gathering. Knowledge of local plants and animals became essential. Edible versus poisonous plants were memorized, methods of preservation discovered. Foraging, hunting, and fishing formed a complex system of sustenance that balanced risk, reward, and environment. As humans moved into colder regions, clothing and shelter evolved. Furs and hides were stitched together with bone needles. Simple dwellings were insulated with grass, mud, and animal hides. Fire was used not only for warmth but for cooking and protection. Every innovation, small and repeated, improved survival odds. Over centuries, humans became increasingly capable of thriving in extreme environments. From icy tundras to arid deserts, communication intensified in these migrations. Shared knowledge of safe routes, seasonal patterns, and hunting techniques created networks of understanding. People traveling hundreds of miles carried ideas, tools, and art. The exchange of knowledge prefigured the trade networks that would later dominate civilization. In essence, humans were creating invisible connections that knit together distant populations long before cities or roads existed. Even in these scattered populations, hierarchy began to appear. Some individuals gained authority through skill, knowledge, or physical ability. These were informal leaders, respected and deferred to in hunting, conflict resolution, and decision-making. While no written records existed, the social structures were sufficient to organize complex activities like group hunts or long migrations. Leadership was situational and earned, rather than inherited. By the time humans had spread into Europe, Asia, and the far reaches of the world, they had adapted, learned, and innovated in ways that no other species had. Their DNA was already mixing with other human species. Their minds were shaping culture, and their bodies were resilient to climate extremes. They were explorers in a literal sense, but also innovators, artists, and thinkers. Every step forward carried the weight of survival and the quiet hope that knowledge could persist. And so, the story of this phase of humanity is not one of conquests or empires, but of movement, adaptation, and the subtle building of culture. Life was hard, repetitive, and fragile, yet humans persisted, carried forward knowledge, and left traces that we can still see today. And the question remains, how did humans decide, after thousands of years of wandering, to stop? What caused them to trade the freedom of movement for the burdens and potential rewards of settlement, agriculture, and villages? That decision, unremarkable at the time, would set the stage for civilization itself. You stand now on a wide plain, the kind where rivers twist slowly across the land, carrying life in their currents. Around you, the world is familiar yet transformed. Humans have learned to move, to adapt, to survive in nearly every climate. But here, something different is emerging. A hesitation to wander, a desire to stay. Imagine small groups gathering in one place season after season, year after year. They have found fertile soil, reliable water, and the promise of stability. This is the dawn of settlement. For countless generations, humans had survived by roaming, following the migrations of animals and the cycles of plants. Now, they experiment with planting seeds in the earth. The change is subtle at first. Scatter a few seeds near a hearth, notice which sprout, and return next season to nurture them. Wheat and barley in the Fertile Crescent, rice along rivers in China, millet in Africa, maize in the Americas. Each innovation begins with patience, observation, and repetition. Planting a single seed requires care, yet it has the potential to feed a family for months. Settling brings its own challenges. Hunting is no longer enough. You cannot rely solely on wild herds, and the environment can be unpredictable. Agriculture is labor-intensive. Fields must be cleared, watered, and tended. Pests and drought threaten months of effort. Yet, it also offers something new: predictability. Surpluses can be stored in clay jars or pits, allowing people to survive lean seasons. The concept of surplus is small but profound. It changes relationships, power dynamics, and even the rhythm of time. The The first villages were clusters of huts or simple dwellings, often circular, made of mud, reeds, or stones. Imagine walking along narrow paths between homes, children playing with carved bones, dogs lying in the sun, elders sitting quietly, watching the world unfold. Each home is modest, but together they form a small community capable of cooperation. People now share resources more formally: food, labor, knowledge. Cooperation becomes essential. The survival of the group depends on each member performing their tasks consistently and efficiently. Daily life is full of ordinary labor that feels repetitive to modern eyes but is crucial. Grinding grain between stones, mending baskets, repairing shelters, tending small gardens. These tasks are not glamorous, but they build the structure of society. They also require skill and memory. Knowing how to plant, when to harvest, how to store food without spoilage, these are the quiet innovations that sustain life. Generations pass down these skills orally, ensuring continuity in the community. Fire remains central. It is no longer just for warmth or protection. Fires are used to cook grain into edible forms, to bake clay into durable pots, and to manage fields by controlled burns. Controlled fire is an early technology that shapes the environment and secures human survival. It allows people to manipulate their surroundings rather than merely react to them, signaling a shift from adaptation to influence. As villages grow, social structures begin to emerge. Some individuals take on specialized roles. Certain people become full-time toolmakers, others weavers, others leaders who resolve disputes or organize work. Hierarchies are subtle at first, often based on skill, age, or wisdom. Leaders are respected because they provide guidance or ensure the survival of the group. Decisions are made collectively, but influenced by experience and authority. This is the quiet birth of social order. Religion and ritual begin to formalize as well. Humans, now stationary, notice the cycles of the sun, moon, and stars more acutely. Seasons dictate planting and harvest. Early shrines or ritual spaces emerge, often marked by stones or clay figurines. Offerings are left in hopes of favorable conditions: rain, fertile soil, protection from pests. Ritual is not superstition alone. It is also a form of communal memory, a way to coordinate action and maintain cultural identity across generations. Technology progresses incrementally. Stone tools become polished, grinding stones are refined, digging sticks and simple plows appear. Clay is molded into pots for storage and cooking. Needles, made from bone, allow for tailored clothing. Water is drawn and carried from rivers, sometimes over long distances. Each improvement seems minor, but combined, they create a system capable of supporting a dense population in one place. Survival becomes less precarious, though never guaranteed. Trade begins to grow beyond mere necessity. Villagers exchange surplus grain, pottery, or crafted items with neighboring settlements. These exchanges are modest but set the stage for more complex networks in the future. Goods travel, as do ideas. A new weaving pattern, a method of pottery decoration, or a technique for storing grain might spread across dozens of miles over decades. Knowledge, like seeds, takes root in multiple places, quietly reshaping the human world. Population slowly increases. Children survive in greater numbers because food is more predictable. Larger groups can coordinate labor more efficiently, defend against predators, and create more complex infrastructure. But larger populations also bring new pressures. Fields must expand, water must be shared, social norms enforced. Conflicts arise over land or resources. These are the first glimpses of what will later become formalized governance. Survival now depends not only on skill but also on cooperation, negotiation, and compromise. Even in these early villages, ordinary life contains small joys. Children run barefoot along dirt paths, women craft ornaments from shells, men repair tools while sharing stories. Community life is interwoven with work, leisure, and ritual. art and creativity persist, from simple figurines to painted walls. Expression is a survival strategy, helping to bond the community and convey lessons that cannot easily be spoken. The shift from nomadic life to settlement is profound. Mobility is sacrificed for stability. Life is now tied to a particular piece of land, and with it comes the notion of ownership. Territories must be defended, leading to early fortifications and social rules. The rhythms of life are now dictated by agriculture rather than migration. Days are measured in planting, tending, and harvesting cycles. The horizon that once defined freedom now becomes a boundary, a place of both security and limitation. Yet, with settlement comes opportunity. Stable food supplies allow for rest, reflection, and experimentation. Some individuals devote time to crafts, some to observation, some to religious practice. Human potential expands because not every day is spent merely surviving. Skills can be honed over years, and knowledge accumulated with less risk of being lost. Civilization, in its slow and quiet form, begins in these small, ordinary acts of continuity and innovation. The question lingers, as it did then. Why did humans choose settlement, knowing it came with labor, disease, and social tension? Why trade freedom for stability, wandering for community? The answer is not simple. It is a combination of opportunity, necessity, and the human capacity to imagine a future beyond immediate survival. That choice, unremarkable in the moment, but revolutionary in retrospect, sets the stage for every city, empire, and nation that follows. You are now entering a time when human communities begin to grow larger and more complex. The small villages we explored earlier are no longer isolated clusters. They are becoming interconnected hubs of food production, craft specialization, and social coordination. The fertility of the land, combined with reliable harvests, allows populations to swell beyond what a single village could comfortably support. As numbers grow, so does the need for order. When too many people inhabit a single space, disputes arise over water, grazing land, and stored grain. Without a system to resolve these conflicts, survival is threatened. Out of this necessity, social hierarchies begin to crystallize. Leadership, once informal and situational, becomes more permanent. Certain individuals accumulate authority, often through a combination of skill, lineage, or sheer charisma. They guide the group in matters of labor allocation, defense, and ritual observance. Imagine a figure standing on a small mound in the center of a village, directing the construction of new granaries or organizing communal labor to maintain irrigation canals. Others follow not out of coercion alone, but out of recognition that their guidance improves the survival of all. Authority is fragile, but the mere act of having recognized leaders begins to transform society. With leadership comes early governance. Some communities formalize roles, designating specific individuals to oversee food distribution, trade negotiations, and defense. These roles are not uniform across regions. In one village, the leader may be primarily a military strategist. In another, a religious figure with authority derived from perceived favor from the gods. Yet the principle is consistent. As populations grow, humans require coordination mechanisms beyond simple consensus. Rules emerge, often unwritten, governing behavior, labor expectations, and the allocation of resources. These early forms of governance are the precursors to kingdoms and states. Irrigation is among the first large-scale cooperative projects. In regions like Mesopotamia, the fertile floodplains of the Tigris and Euphrates require careful management. Water must be directed from rivers to fields through canals, levees, and ditches. Maintenance demands coordinated labor and constant oversight. Failure to manage irrigation can lead to crop failure, famine, or conflict over water rights. Such projects necessitate planning, hierarchy, and accountability. They are some of the earliest examples of humans organizing on a scale larger than a single family or extended household. The division of labor also becomes more pronounced. As some individuals dedicate themselves to agriculture, Others can specialize in crafting tools, pottery, or textiles. Skilled laborers emerge, producing items not only for immediate use but also for trade. This specialization encourages innovation. A potter who devotes decades to refining techniques produces sturdier containers, more intricate decorations, and more efficient storage solutions. A blacksmith experimenting with new alloys creates stronger tools and weapons. Each innovation has ripple effects, improving productivity, safety, and the overall standard of living. Trade networks expand alongside these growing settlements. Villages become interconnected nodes, exchanging surplus grain, crafted goods, and raw materials. Long-distance trade routes appear, connecting communities separated by hundreds of miles. Obsidian, copper, and exotic shells are carried from one region to another, not merely for utility, but as symbols of wealth, status, and cultural connection. These exchanges bring not only goods but ideas, religious practices, and techniques. In a sense, early trade serves as both an economic and a cultural glue, linking communities in fragile but vital ways. Religion continues to play a central role. As leaders consolidate power, they often claim divine favor or mandate. Temples become centers of authority, both spiritual and administrative. Priests and priestesses manage rituals, maintain records, and oversee offerings. Religious ceremonies coordinate labor for planting, harvest, or construction, creating cohesion in increasingly complex societies. People come to understand their leaders not only as guides in practical matters, but as intermediaries with forces beyond their control. The intertwining of governance and spirituality reinforces hierarchies and provides legitimacy to authority. Conflict, too, becomes more organized. Early communities often compete over arable land, water access, or valuable resources. Raiding and warfare are no longer ad hoc skirmishes. They become strategic, sometimes involving coordinated attacks, fortified settlements, and specialized weapons. The ability to defend territory is essential, and successful leaders are those who can protect and expand their people's resources. Fortifications appear, walls, ditches, and gates, designed to withstand both natural and human threats. Security shapes settlement design, labor allocation, and even social cohesion. Population density introduces new challenges. Sanitation becomes a concern. Disease spreads more easily in tightly packed communities. Managing waste, water supply, and shared living spaces requires both innovation and cooperation. People develop early techniques to mitigate risks, from raised homes to drainage ditches. These small adaptations improve survival odds and demonstrate human ingenuity in the face of environmental pressures. Writing begins to emerge in this period as a practical tool. In Mesopotamia, cuneiform records track harvests, taxes, and labor contributions. In Egypt, hieroglyphs document the wealth and decrees of the pharaohs. Writing is not yet literature. It is primarily an administrative technology designed to coordinate complex societies. Yet the very act of recording information transforms human thought. Knowledge can now extend beyond memory, passed down through generations with far greater accuracy. It allows leaders to manage larger populations and ensures that agreements, debts, and obligations are enforceable across time and space. Economy and wealth distribution create early social stratification. Certain families accumulate more land, better tools, or surplus food, establishing a distinction between elites and commoners. Status becomes tied not only to skill or leadership, but also to resources and lineage. Elites wield power in multiple domains, controlling land, religious authority, and military strength. Commoners work the fields, tend livestock, and perform essential labor. Inequalities emerge, but they also create stability as roles are codified. Communities can plan, predict, and survive. Art and architecture flourish in these early kingdoms. Temples, granaries, and defensive walls are constructed using knowledge accumulated over generations. Decorative carvings, pottery, and figurines continue to appear, reflecting religious beliefs, social status, and communal identity. Art becomes a vehicle for communication across space and time, a record of human thought and a reinforcement of social hierarchies. Even seemingly mundane objects carry layers of meaning, reflecting a society's values, skills, and ambitions. Education begins in its most rudimentary form. Elders, priests, and skilled artisans teach apprentices their crafts. Children learn survival skills alongside cultural and religious practices. Knowledge is codified in rituals, oral instructions, and eventually writing. Communities recognize that survival and prosperity depend on passing knowledge from one generation to the next. Literacy, skill, and ritual competence become forms of social capital, shaping opportunities, status, and influence. Disease and public health remain persistent challenges. Larger populations facilitate the spread of pathogens. Epidemics can devastate communities, requiring adaptations in housing, water storage, and communal behavior. These challenges are often subtle, invisible, but they shape social organization. Populations develop informal health measures, quarantine practices, and ritualized cleanliness, demonstrating early human understanding of cause and effect. By the time kingdoms are established along rivers and fertile plains, humanity has shifted dramatically. The lives of most people are no longer purely about immediate survival. They are entwined with social structures, religious authority, and cooperative labor. Each decision what to plant, how to build, whom to follow, resonates through the community. Leaders emerge, not as rulers of empty land, but as coordinators, innovators, and enforcers. Society becomes more complex, layered, and resilient. And yet, despite all this organization, humans remain vulnerable. Famine, conflict, disease, and environmental change continue to threaten lives. Success is never guaranteed, only improved odds. Communities rise, prosper, and sometimes collapse, leaving behind ruins, pottery shards, and the faint traces of human thought. These remnants, when pieced together by archaeologists, reveal both the fragility and ingenuity of early civilizations. So, you are left with a question: what drives humans to organize, hierarchize, and centralize authority, knowing that complexity brings both opportunity and risk? Why do societies continue to expand their influence, create inequalities, and build structures that endure long after the people who constructed them are gone? These questions echo across the millennia, shaping the rhythm of human history and the choices you make today. You now step into a world where villages and small kingdoms have grown into something more expansive early empires. The rivers, plains, and valleys that once supported scattered settlements are now dotted with sprawling centers of power. Populations have increased dramatically, sometimes numbering in the tens of thousands in a single city. The sheer scale of life is dizzying. Streets are narrow, markets bustling, granaries packed with surplus, and temples reaching toward the sky. Authority, once informal, is now centralized, codified, and deeply intertwined with religion and ideology. These early empires arise for multiple reasons. Fertile land supports denser populations, producing surplus food that allows some people to dedicate themselves to tasks other than subsistence. Skilled laborers, priests, and administrators emerge, creating specialization that strengthens the state. Military might becomes essential, both to defend the population and to extend influence over neighboring regions. The combination of wealth, manpower, and strategy allows these early states to consolidate control over larger territories than ever before. Codification of law is one of the most significant developments of this period. The famous Code of Hammurabi in Mesopotamia, for instance, does not emerge spontaneously. It arises from necessity. As populations grow, disputes over land, labor, property, and personal behavior become frequent. A written legal system allows rulers to impose order consistently, reducing arbitrary judgment and creating predictability. Laws cover everything: trade contracts, marriage, inheritance, debt, and penalties for theft or assault. This codification marks a fundamental shift. Human society is no longer governed solely by custom or oral tradition. It is governed by rules that extend across space and time. Trade networks expand dramatically in these empires. Surplus food, metals, textiles, and crafted goods move across vast distances. Caravans traverse deserts, boats navigate rivers and coasts, and merchants carry goods from one city to another, sometimes hundreds of miles away. Exotic materials lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, copper from Anatolia, tin from Central Europe travel along these networks. Trade is no longer just about survival. It becomes a display of wealth, power, and status. Markets buzz with activity, and economic specialization drives further innovation in production, accounting, and transportation. With empire comes monumental architecture. Cities are fortified with massive walls, gates, and towers designed to impress and intimidate. Temples and palaces dominate the skyline, reflecting religious authority and royal power. Granaries and storage facilities indicate the administration of surplus and the management of resources. These structures are not merely functional, they are symbols of stability and dominance, carefully designed to project order and continuity. Each stone and carved relief tells a story of authority, identity, and ambition. The role of religion intensifies. Rulers often claim divine right or favor, presenting themselves as intermediaries between gods and people. Temples serve as centers of worship, education, and administration. Priests maintain records, oversee rituals, and advise leaders. Religious festivals coordinate labor for planting, harvest, or construction projects. These ceremonies reinforce social cohesion and legitimize authority, linking the spiritual and temporal realms in ways that shape the empire's identity. Military organization becomes increasingly sophisticated. Armies are no longer ad hoc bands but trained units, equipped with standardized weapons and armor. Logistics, supply chains, and communication systems are developed to sustain campaigns. Leaders must balance the need for conquest with the challenges of governing a diverse population. Empires expand not only through brute force but also through diplomacy, alliances, and cultural integration. Success depends on coordination, foresight, and the ability to manage both people and resources across vast distances. Communication and record-keeping are essential. Writing becomes central to administration. Cuneiform tablets, papyrus scrolls, and carved inscriptions allow rulers to issue orders, record transactions, and maintain historical memory. Bureaucracies emerge, with scribes, accountants, and clerks managing the flow of information. This allows empires to function efficiently, despite the challenges of scale. A decision made in the capital can be communicated and enforced across dozens of distant towns, creating a cohesion unimaginable in earlier periods. Economy and taxation are key to empire building. Farmers contribute grain, artisans provide crafted goods, and merchants pay tolls or tariffs. Surplus resources support the army, fund construction, and sustain the administrative class. Wealth accumulation is both a tool and a measure of power. Leaders must balance the extraction of resources with the well-being of the population. Excessive taxation or mismanagement can provoke unrest. The management of resources becomes a science, blending arithmetic, observation, and political strategy. Social stratification intensifies. Elites control land, wealth, and access to religious authority. Commoners work the fields, provide labor, or craft goods. Slaves or indentured workers often serve households, public projects, or temples. Social mobility is limited but sometimes possible through skill, military service, or religious office. Inequalities create stability. In some cases, clear roles allow for organized labor and resource allocation, but they also sow seeds of tension, dissent, and rebellion. Urban life becomes more complex. Cities develop markets, roads, and sanitation systems. Neighborhoods emerge, often with distinct social or occupational identities. Noise, crowding, and smells are constant companions. People live close together, trade ideas and goods, and navigate social hierarchies daily. The city is a microcosm of empire, It reflects the successes, tensions, and aspirations of the wider political and economic system. Cultural and intellectual life flourishes despite the challenges of survival. Craftspeople refine techniques in metallurgy, pottery, and weaving. Scholars record astronomical observations, medicinal knowledge, and legal codes. Religious and philosophical thought expands. Education, still limited to elites in most cases, ensures that knowledge persists and evolves. Human creativity, which began with simple tools and cave paintings, now manifests in monumental architecture, sophisticated artistry, and complex ritual practice. Disease and public health remain constant challenges. Dense populations, combined with trade and travel, facilitate the spread of pathogens. Epidemics can disrupt agriculture, commerce, and military campaigns. Administrators respond with innovations in water management, sanitation, and urban planning. Despite technological and organizational advances, human vulnerability persists, a reminder that no matter how large an empire, survival is never guaranteed. By this period, humans have achieved something remarkable: the ability to organize, innovate, and govern on an unprecedented scale. Communities that once consisted of a few dozen people now number in the tens or hundreds of thousands, linked by trade, law, and shared culture. Authority is formalized, inequality codified, and cultural identity preserved through both material and spiritual means. Yet, fragility remains. Collapse, invasion, or environmental change can undo centuries of accumulation in a single generation. And so, the story of early empires is one of both triumph and vulnerability. Humans have learned to coordinate, codify, and expand, but they remain at the mercy of forces beyond their control. The lessons of this period echo through time. Organization, innovation, and cooperation allow humans to reach unprecedented scales, but they do not guarantee permanence. Societies rise and fall, leaving behind ruins, records, and lessons for the future. The question lingers: how do humans balance growth, authority, and survival? How do societies expand without collapsing under their own complexity? And what determines whether an empire endures or falls? These questions remain central to the story of humanity, shaping the path that brings you to the present day. You now find yourself at the crossroads of continents, where rivers meet seas and fertile lands meet harsh deserts. Here, humans are no longer simply surviving or consolidating power locally. Trading and connecting with distant communities in ways that reshape the human world. Early trade empires emerge, not merely as political powers, but as networks of exchange, influence, and cultural diffusion. Imagine bustling ports along rivers and coasts, where boats carry grain, timber, metals, and crafted goods to lands hundreds of miles away. Trade begins with necessity, but soon becomes ambition. A community that produces surplus grain or skilled pottery finds that it can exchange its goods for resources unavailable locally. Obsidian from volcanic regions, copper from distant mines, rare shells and stones all circulate across continents. With trade comes knowledge: how to navigate rivers, read the stars, negotiate contracts, and understand foreign customs. Trade routes become arteries of culture, linking people separated by hundreds of miles and creating the first interconnected economic networks. Caravans traverse deserts with careful planning, relying on animals, knowledge of water sources, and caravan leaders who memorize the terrain. The risks are immense: dehydration, sandstorms, bandits. Yet the rewards are considerable. Those who succeed bring back goods that sustain their communities, symbolize status, and support further trade. Ports along coasts thrive as centers of commerce, where merchants, sailors, and craftsmen converge. Cities like Byblos, Ur, and later Tyre flourish as hubs of material exchange, diplomatic negotiation, and cultural interaction. Technology supports these developments. Boats are designed for river travel or coastal navigation, some with sails, some powered by oars. Roads and paths are maintained, sometimes with markers or milestones. Warehouses store surplus for long periods, often guarded or administered by officials. Tools for measuring, accounting, and weighing become increasingly sophisticated. Early mathematics, though simple, is practical, ensuring fair trade and preventing disputes. Writing is used extensively to record transactions, creating accountability across distances. With trade comes cultural exchange. Ideas, religious beliefs, technologies, and artistic motifs spread along routes as effectively as goods. A tool design perfected in one city may appear hundreds of miles away within a generation. Religious practices adapt and integrate with new environments. Languages borrow terms for commodities, professions, and rituals. Even culinary practices spread, as grains, spices, and techniques travel from one region to another. The human world grows larger in thought and experience, even as travel remains arduous. Exploration follows trade naturally. Humans, curious and ambitious, push into unfamiliar lands seeking resources or opportunity. Some follow rivers inland, discovering fertile valleys and hidden minerals. Others brave coastlines and open seas, learning the patterns of winds and currents. Exploration is risky. Unknown predators, harsh terrain, and disease accompany every step. Yet human resilience, observation, and problem-solving allow small groups to chart new territories, establishing settlements that later become nodes in trade networks. Political structures adapt to this growth. Trade empires require stable administration to manage resources, enforce contracts, and protect merchants. Early bureaucracies expand, with scribes, tax collectors, and officials monitoring movement of goods and people. Authority becomes formalized, often legitimized through divine sanction or tradition. Leaders must balance extraction of resources with the needs of the population. Too much taxation or coercion threatens unrest and disruption of trade. Efficient governance is not optional, it is survival. Conflict is closely tied to trade. Wealth attracts envy and ambition. Cities and regions compete for access to valuable resources, control of routes, and dominance over markets. Armies are mobilized not only to defend territory, but to secure trade advantages. Siege warfare, fortified settlements, and strategic alliances become tools of economic as well as military power. Those who control trade routes often wield influence far beyond their immediate territories. Communication is vital. Messages, orders, and records must travel across distances, often faster than merchants themselves. Early systems include runners, signal fires, and encoded writing. Knowledge is power. A city that understands the flow of goods, resources, and labor can coordinate effectively, predict shortages, and respond to crises. Written records ensure consistency across generations, reducing conflict and preserving the collective memory of trade and negotiation. Economy and finance evolve in response. Standardized weights, measures, and currencies facilitate commerce. Early forms of credit or promissory notes appear in some regions, allowing trade to extend beyond immediate barter. Merchants track profits and losses meticulously, sometimes under the supervision of administrators or rulers. Wealth accumulation creates social stratification, but also enables investment in infrastructure, education, and art. Economic systems now shape daily life as profoundly as agriculture or defense once did. Urban centers thrive as cultural hubs. Markets bustle with activity. Craftsmen repair tools, merchants negotiate prices. Children play amidst the crowd. Temples, workshops, and warehouses are densely packed. Citizens, workers, and travelers share knowledge and techniques. Cultural innovation flourishes. Art, music, and storytelling evolve alongside commerce. Even mundane objects, pottery, tools, textiles, reflect aesthetics, identity, and status. Cities are not only economic engines but incubators of human creativity. Religion adapts and spreads with trade. Merchants carry beliefs as readily as goods. Deities associated with commerce, navigation, and fortune gain prominence. rituals evolve to protect travelers and merchants. Religious centers become stops along trade routes, offering shelter, sustenance, and spiritual guidance. Spiritual life is entwined with daily commerce, creating continuity and shared identity across regions. Population growth continues alongside trade and exploration. Cities swell with residents drawn by opportunity, security, or religious significance. This density brings innovation, but also challenges. Sanitation, water management, and disease prevention become critical. Epidemics can disrupt trade, labor, and administration. Communities innovate, creating drainage systems, wells, and public spaces to manage human concentration. Knowledge spreads through necessity, observation, and trial and error, enhancing resilience. The spread of ideas is perhaps as important as the spread of goods. Technologies, agricultural practices, and artistic motifs move along the same paths as merchants. Navigation techniques, metallurgy, pottery styles, and textile patterns diffuse across vast distances. Written language and numerical systems enable coordination over space and time, while oral traditions ensure cultural memory persists in less literate communities. Humans are now connected not just physically but intellectually, creating a foundation for civilizations yet to emerge. Yet, despite all this growth, vulnerability persists. Trade networks are fragile, dependent on trust, safety, and environmental stability. Droughts, floods, piracy, or war can sever routes, disrupt supplies, and threaten survival. Empires that flourish in one era may crumble the next, leaving behind ruins, records, and artifacts that hint at their former scale. Humanity's achievements are remarkable, but always provisional. Resilience, adaptability, and ingenuity are required continuously. And so, you are left to wonder, how do humans manage the tension between opportunity and risk? How do trade, exploration, and innovation extend both influence and vulnerability? The networks created in this period, though primitive by modern standards, foreshadow the global connections, economic systems, and cultural exchanges that shape your own world. The human story is one of persistent adaptation, ambition, and the spread of ideas that transform not just land, but thought itself. You now stand in the midst of the world's first great empires, where human ingenuity has transformed landscapes, societies, and thought itself. Cities rise like islands of order amidst rivers, plains, and deserts, their walls stretching high, their gates adorned with carvings that tell stories of power, religion, and ambition. These cities are not mere shelters. They are laboratories of culture, administration, and innovation. You can almost hear the hum of daily life. Merchants haggling over grain, artisans chiseling stone, scribes inscribing cuneiform or hieroglyphs onto clay and papyrus, priests conducting rituals to ensure the favor of the gods. Writing, in particular, has become the backbone of civilization. From the Tigris and Euphrates in Mesopotamia to the Nile in Egypt, the ability to record information transforms society. Initially a tool for accounting, tracking, grain, trade, and labor writing evolves into a medium for law, literature, and history. Legal codes like Hammurabi's provide structure and predictability, while Egyptian hieroglyphs document dynasties, religious ceremonies, and monumental projects. The act of writing extends human memory beyond a single lifetime, allowing knowledge to accumulate, refine, and guide future generations. You can almost picture scribes hunched over tablets, the stylus pressing impressions into wet clay, knowing that what they write will outlast them, shaping human thought for centuries to come. Monumental architecture follows naturally from these advances. Temples, palaces, ziggurats, and pyramids dominate skylines, representing both spiritual and temporal authority. Stone is quarried and transported with meticulous planning. Artisans carve intricate reliefs that tell stories of rulers, gods, and victories. Granaries and fortifications showcase organizational skill, ensuring food security and defense. Architecture becomes a tool for both function and ideology, each structure reinforcing hierarchy religious devotion, and the vision of permanence. Imagine standing before a towering ziggurat, knowing that the labor of thousands went into its creation, and yet its purpose is both practical and symbolic, to connect the earthly and divine, to awe citizens and outsiders alike. Art, in tandem, flourishes across empires. Pottery, jewelry, sculpture, and textiles reflect not just utility, but identity, status, and cultural memory. Decorative motifs travel through trade networks, blending styles from distant regions. Music and performance, often tied to religious or civic life, echo through courts, marketplaces, and temples. Art becomes a vessel for communication, connecting communities across both space and time, and fostering a shared human experience. Even the most mundane items, a decorated bowl, a carved amulet, carry layers of meaning that reveal social structures, beliefs, and daily life. Religious systems reach new levels of complexity. Temples and priesthoods organize worship, enforce rituals, and maintain knowledge. Deities represent natural forces, societal ideals, and cosmic order. Festivals, sacrifices, and observances unify populations, aligning social behavior with celestial and agricultural cycles. Religion intertwines with governance. Rulers claim divine authority, and legitimacy is reinforced through ritual. Priests and scribes act as intermediaries, ensuring that knowledge, tradition, and social norms persist across generations. The spiritual landscape becomes as rich and organized as the physical one, a reflection of humanity's growing mastery over environment and society. Long-distance trade, exploration, and communication networks continue to expand. Empires exchange not only goods but ideas, mathematics, astronomy, medical knowledge, and cultural practices. The flow of information accelerates innovation, spreads technology, and strengthens connections across continents. Roads, rivers, and maritime routes allow people to traverse great distances, carrying ideas as readily as commodities. Human curiosity, coupled with necessity, drives expansion, exploration, and cultural diffusion, laying the groundwork for interconnected civilizations. You can imagine merchants and travelers exchanging stories, methods, and inventions along bustling trade routes, creating an invisible web that binds distant communities. The rise of law, administration, and bureaucracy ensures that these complex societies function despite their size. Officials record taxes, mediate disputes, and enforce contracts. Hierarchies are formalized, roles defined, and accountability maintained. Populations are increasingly stratified. Elites oversee labor, religious, and military functions, while commoners perform essential work to sustain daily life. Inequality, though challenging, provides structure. It allows large groups to coordinate effectively, manage resources, and endure crises. Social complexity, though invisible in daily life, is now the backbone of empire. Despite these achievements, vulnerability remains. Environmental changes, famine, disease, and conflict threaten even the most organized societies. Epidemics sweep through densely populated cities. Floods or droughts destroy crops. Invasions destabilize empires. The resilience of human communities depends on adaptability, foresight, and coordination. It is a delicate balance. Growth and sophistication bring power, but they also magnify risk. Empires rise and fall, leaving behind ruins, artifacts, and written records that allow us, thousands of years later, to reconstruct their stories. And yet, the human story is persistent. Knowledge continues to accumulate. Writing preserves memory, trade networks transmit innovation, and urban centers foster creativity. Even as empires collapse, survivors carry forward skills, ideas, and cultural practices. Early humans have transformed from wandering bands into architects of civilizations capable of shaping landscapes, belief systems, and societies on unprecedented scales. Each innovation, from agriculture to monumental construction, from legal codification to trade networks, creates ripple effects, influencing generations far into the future. By the close of this era, humanity is poised on the threshold of global connection. Civilizations stretch across continents, linked by commerce, migration, and shared cultural frameworks. Knowledge flows across time and space, and the seeds of modern society, politics, law, religion, art, and commerce are firmly planted. You can almost see the continuum. Scattered villages become cities, cities evolve into empires, empires foster trade and culture connect humanity across the globe. The foundations of the world you inhabit today are laid, brick by brick, story by story. And so, as you reflect on the entirety of human history, from wandering hunter-gatherers to agricultural villages, from city-states to sprawling empires, you see a single, unbroken thread: human resilience, curiosity, and creativity. Ordinary lives, filled with toil, observation, and subtle ingenuity, shape the trajectory of the species. Each choice, each adaptation, each innovation contributes to the complex tapestry of civilization. Humanity survives, thrives, and transforms not because of grand gestures alone, but because of countless small, persistent acts repeated across generations. And the question lingers, even now, as humans continue to connect, innovate, and expand, what lessons from this long past can guide the choices of today? How do resilience, cooperation, and ingenuity balance with risk, inequality, and conflict? The story of your species is still unfolding, and every discovery, invention, and cultural exchange adds another thread to the vast fabric of human history.